This is the items that are needed to make our 8.5-inch squares, 2 times method. We will need 2 pieces of fabric that are both 9.5-inch square. I am using a dark and a light to show contrast. You will need a rotary cutter or scissors and a pen. You will also need a straight ruler that is at least 9.5 inches long or longer. You will also need a squaring ruler that is 8.5 inches square or larger. I am using a 9.5-inch square. Okay, so now that we have our fabric, 9.5-inch squares on top of each other right side up, we are now going to move on to the cutting. I am using a 2.5-inch ruler that is 15 inches long. You are now going to cut 2.5 inches from each edge of your fabric, of your squares. So I'm going to line them up, first on the side, and then the bottom. And it's very important that you keep your pieces together. So here's a trick for those of you who do not have a rotating cutting mat. I have mine on a smaller mat on my cutting table. I'm just going to turn it. So now I don't have to move my fabric. So I'm going to make another cut on this side. Again, very important the pieces stay together because you want to keep the measurements exact. A 2.5-inch cut on the bottom and turn it again. And this one is the side. Here's the last 2.5-inch cut. So I'm going to move these pieces off. I'm going to have to take them off properly apparently. I'm going to move them here. And we're going to do the same with the cutting, with the ones we do with the scissors. Now that these are all cut with my rotary cutter and my scissors, it's time to separate your blocks. You take your middle block and move ahead. You take your corner blocks and move ahead. If I can separate them. Same with the other, with the one with the scissors. Oops. Now you go underneath, because you don't want to use the same one, and you take the rectangle, the 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, and move them up. So now you have 9 pieces for a 9 patch. All sewn together will be your square, but it gives you 2. Do the same with your cut pieces or your scissor cut pieces, if that's the method you choose to use. And after this, the next step will be to sew it together. And how I set that on the 9850 is I go to whatever that little one is called. I hit the quilting and I go the 1/4 inch stitch, and then I open up this button and I come to the side to 8.5. I also move my stitch length down to 2.7, it's my preference, and 3.8. And I hit okay. We are now ready to start sewing a quarter scant stitch. So the next step is I've come to my sewing machine. I'm going to use the Janome 9850, and we are going to bring our blocks with us set to how you want them sewn. So I am going to take the top 2 pieces and sew them together. I'm going to take the next 2 pieces, put the middle piece on top of the top, and the last one. The next step is to iron, and you have to remember you're going to iron to the dark side or the darker of your 2 fabrics. And in my case, it's going to be the black, but you do want to iron to set your seams first, and that's to press down on them. So I want to iron towards the black, or to the dark, so my dark is on top. I bring it over, finger press, and set my seam. For my next one, it's the same thing. I've already set the seam. I finger press, iron to the dark, and this one is the same. Finger press, and to the dark, and push. So that is square almost done. Let's go back. Right? Yes? Okay, I'm just going to now take the last 3 pieces and sew to complete my rows. There's one. My 2.5 by 4.5 rectangle goes on my 4.5 inch square. This is number 2. So now that I'm back, now we do the same thing again. I have to iron to the dark side, but I'm setting my seams first. So I have to flip this one over so that it sits right. This one just comes over. I finger press and set it. And put that one over. So now that they are ironed, I'm now ready to sew my rows together. And the reason why I iron towards the dark side is because now my seams, when I sew the rows together, they will kiss, or they will lock, or there's so many different terms for them. So when I fold it over and I put them in, you can see here, they lock nicely, like they don't go anywhere, and my seams will all line up perfectly. Back to the sewing machine, and I have my seams nested or locked or kissed. I am going to back stitch this one, and you stop after each nesting to make sure the next one is nested. It's locked, it's going nowhere, my seam is straight. And you do it again for the next row. The last step, I iron these seams open, and that is just to reduce the bulk for the quilter when we are sewing the blocks together. So all you do is open them up and press them, turn it over, make sure your seams are open down, and give them another press. And if you look carefully, look in, you'll see all my points are perfect. You continue on with the same steps for your second block. For the last step for piecing our block, we are now going to make sure it is square and to the right size. If you did your piecing or your cutting properly, your 1-inch scant seam, you should have no problem getting your 8.5-inch square. So I have a 9.5-inch ruler, so I'm going to put my corner up on the 1-inch line. So now, because this is now my 8.5-inch square, I'm going to have this line running through the middle of my blocks, and I want to get it as much perfect as you can. And then you see if you have anything to cut off, which I don't think I do. So there's nothing on that side. We're going to turn it around and do the other side of the block and do the exact same thing. Line this one up in the corners. And to see if I have anything to cut, I do on this side. And that's it. And we now have an 8.5-inch square. You will get minimal to cut off. And there's your 8.5, your 8.5, and your 8.5. Continue with the other block. That's it.